From Boca Raton, Florida, Rabbis Efrem Goldberg, Philip Moskowitz, and Josh Broide are taking you behind the Bima. The BRS rabbis shmooze about contemporary issues and talk to special guests who give a behind-the-scenes look at how they got to where they are and what keeps them going. Welcome to Behind the Bima.
Hello, Rabbi Moskowitz, Rabbi Broide. Welcome, everybody. It's Wednesday night, 9 p.m., and that means it's time to go
Behind the Bima.
Behind the Bima. You know, I really look forward to Wednesday nights. The weeks are chaotic and busy and stressful, and hanging out with you guys. You know, the beauty of this platform is you can't see anybody else, so you don't really know are people listening, not listening, but we have fun nonetheless, and I always enjoy our conversation and catching up and our banter, so it's good to be together again. And I want to actually come right off the bat with... That's right. I've got some breaking news coming right off the top of the show tonight. Very exciting. Very exciting news for you tonight. Are you ready? It's a good thing that you're both sitting down for this news.
Pulling it out early, by the way.
I'm very excited about it. I have to be honest with you. It's a big day for me and my whole family. So some of you know that I'm not announcing Aliyah.
I was going to say, can you give me a heads up if you ever make that announcement?
No, I'm not. I'm not going to say it's as exciting as that, but I will tell you it's exciting. Ooh. So I've spoken about before that during Corona, my daughter Esty and I planted a garden in our backyard, and tonight I ate the red pepper from the garden. And I have to tell you, it's a very special feeling, and we're going to talk to Reb Joey about this because it's a very mystical feeling to plant something and take a seed, a nothing, a garnished, negligible, and you put it into fertile soil in the ground, and you nurture it, and you watch it grow, and you pluck it. My daughter plucked it, and it's cut, and you eat it. I said to my wife, we both know the experience now of giving birth to something.
I was going to say, it's called children.
we've both carried something, right, and we both know the experience of birthing it. And that didn't go over so well.
The comments
that didn't go over so well.
Right now.
Exactly.
You don't
I'm
know.
in trouble.
You don't know.
That did not go over so well with her, but I will tell you that it was an amazing experience. You put a seed, a little sapling. We did get a head start from Home Depot. Thank you, Home Depot. But you put that in the ground. And I'll tell you why it's particularly meaningful for me today, because I saw a quote earlier today in an article from Tim Ferriss about the time he almost committed suicide. And he had a quote in there. He says it's like a Cherokee quote. I Googled it. It's unclear whoever said it. It really doesn't matter. The quote is a fantastic quote, which relates directly to this feeling, to this concept. And it is, they tried to bury us. They didn't know that we were seeds. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. Sometimes someone knocks you down. They try to bury you, but they don't realize you're a seed and you're about to sprout and you're about to grow. And it's really all coming together tonight because ate the pepper for the first time. Saw that quote today, they tried to bury, but if you're a seed, all they're doing by burying you is making sure that you blossom and grow. And tonight's Rosh Chodesh Shvat. And we've begun the countdown to Tu B'Shvat. And that's all about seeds blossoming, growing, regenerating, coming out of the darkness of winter, believing in the bright future. And hopefully we're coming out of this dark winter called Corona, and there's a bright future of blossoming and growing. So the pepper was beautiful. It really... it's hard to eat it. I understand the mitzvah of Bikurim. You take the first thing that you got, and you don't even get to eat it. You bring it to Yerushalayim. You got to give it to God. You say, God, everything belongs, even if all first, they belong to you. So I'm not saying I'm a farmer. I'm not saying I'm not. But I'm saying I relate a little bit more to the concept of Bikurim, and it's a big night.
Now, how much of that was because you wanted to try the pepper, and how much of that was because you were anticipating the article you were going to write once you were able to taste the pepper?
It's a great question. My children have said all along that the only reason that we have a garden is so I have drasha material. And I'm not going to lie, I've referenced the garden.
Once.
I've used it
twice.
I have gone to the garden, and I will continue to go to the garden. And maybe it began as drasha material, but it's turned into a love affair. And it needs more work, the garden. It definitely needs more work, a little love. There's so many lessons about a garden. I mean, this is Revolba's planting and building, about raising children, but sunlight and air, it needs attention, nurturing, but that's neither here nor there. I just wanted to share that exciting.
That'll be the next cover of Mishpacha will be about planting a garden.
Oh boy, I think we're past that.
Dude, one second. It was today's daf. Don't forget. I don't know which you had. Rabbi Rosner brings in. If you bring something to the Beis HaMikdash, that's not part of the Shiva Minim for Bikurim,
Right.
does it become
Right.
hektish? Right?
Okay.
Isn't that? So
Yes.
you bring your pepper. Does it take
Perfect.
on the?
Do you have you ever grown something? Do you either of you relate to that experience?
Well, so for me, it's not planting. I planting and I don't go well together. But there is something called the IKEA effect, where when you are involved in investing in what you're building, it means a lot more to you, right? So because we build alongside IKEA, we value that more than if I just went to a store and bought it. So the reason why you liked that pepper tonight was not just because it was a delicious pepper, because you invested your energy into that. So I have experienced that. Like when I get one of those things from IKEA or a different store and I'm building it, and I feel like, I'm like manly at that moment in time. So that bookshelf, like that's part of me afterwards. Like that's a different type of bookshelf than if I just get it delivered.
That's the Rav Dessler, the whole word on chesed, the idea that parents love children more than children can ever love parents, because when we invest a piece of ourselves into something, we love it as an extension of ourselves. So I love that pepper. I'm not ashamed or embarrassed to say it. Now, if I love it, why did I eat it? Maybe I love myself even more. But it was a struggle. I really wanted to not eat it, but then it would just rot and disappear. So I was really excited to eat that pepper. Now, by the way, I did not actually see the pepper come from the garden into the salad I ate when I just got home. It's possible. It's like a Publix pepper, and my family just wants me to feel really good. But I'm pretty sure it's a pepper. I tasted the love of the garden in that pepper. And what do you think about that quote? Any reaction to that quote? They tried to bury us. They didn't realize we were seeds.
I love that quote. I think that's an amazing quote.
It's a great quote, right?
Quote.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Basically, you can see yourself as a victim.
You can bounce back, right? You can see yourself as a victim, or you could view that as part of the growth process. I actually wrote about that in my weekly article this week. Anyone can welcome to read it. But the whole notion that the obstacle becomes the path, right? That whatever adversity you're facing actually becomes your path to greatness, your path to success, your mission, your calling, your purpose.
Right, for sure. Tell us more about the article. What inspires your article? Let's talk about this for a moment. We're going to bring Rabbi Joey Rosenfeld on shortly. There's a lot of excitement. I want to thank our sponsors tonight, Nini and Donnie Ross, for their refuah shlema of a good friend of so many of us, Ya'al Liora Basara and Yerachmiel Daniel Ben Tova Basha. The Shabush have a complete, speedy, painless, fast, and whole recovery, a refuah shlema, complete recovery, and also sponsored in honor of the Menal, the principal, the Rosh Hashiva of DRS, a good friend of the show Behind the Bima, a former guest, and a good friend of all of ours, Rabbi Yossi Kamenetsky, a longtime friend of each of us personally and of our show. It's really great that it was sponsored in his honor. And again, they should have a refuah shlema. And a huge thank you to the Rosses for sponsoring. So we're going to bring our guest on in a moment. But let's talk about what motivates you. Do you ever have writer's block? Do you hit a wall? Rabbi Moskowitz, I've been writing for a bunch of years, although it's still each week is a new challenge, and you're only as good as what you wrote recently. You have taken up the writing. Trust me, I know that the hard way. But you have taken up writing this year and during this pandemic, and really, it's more power to you. Hats off to you. I'm not going to play the hats off to you, but hats off to you that you've taken up. Tell us what that's been like, that journey towards writing. How is it different for you than speaking, writing? And how do you find inspiration each week? And have you hit the wall of writer's block?
So it's interesting. You have been encouraging me to write for many years, and I've been reluctant and reticent to do so. I find when you speak, it's engaging an audience. It's much more of a personal experience. And one of the reasons I was nervous about writing was because it felt like much more of a cold experience, right? I put down my words and I can't interact with the person who is reading it. And I didn't like that as much. In retrospect, now that I've tried it, I love writing. I find it's a very different outlet than speaking, but I'm enjoying it immensely. Some weeks, as you know, you hit a total block, you're exhausted, nothing's coming to you, and you might repurpose an old drasha. Other weeks, just like a drasha, sometimes you're having a conversation with someone, sometimes you have an interaction, and it sparks an idea in your head, and you write about it. So that was this week. I had a conversation with someone last night, and it occurred to me that is what I wanted to write about this week. And so I put pen to paper, as they say, or my fingers to my keyboard. And this morning I wrote an article about it that will be published in the BRS Weekly.
Can't wait. Everybody should read it. We're actually talking about, and look forward soon, when we do our BRS Plus launch, the BRS Global Community, and making available to the people who are part of that global community a version of our weekly, which is just the articles. You don't need to know the yahrzeits and the birthdays of our local members, but the things that apply more globally. We're really excited. And it includes articles by Rabbi Moskowitz. Rabbi Broide, what's holding you back from writing? When are you going to dictate thoughts that can appear in an article?
So first of all, I got a few things to say. But first of all, if anyone wants to see the articles, Rabbi Goldberg, Rabbi Moskowitz, just go to Aish, which they're going to be renaming Aish BRS, because basically every article on there is from Rabbi Moskowitz and Rabbi Goldberg. My wife went there last week. She needed a Dvar Torah, and she's reading this. She's like, "This is a great Dvar Torah," and she had to tell someone the Dvar Torah. She says, "This is Rabbi Goldberg's." She didn't even realize it was yours. It's so funny. I'm just saying. But listen, I once wrote an article. This goes back probably about 7-8 years ago, and I thought it was because something happened on an airplane. I was on an LL flight. I thought it'd be a great article. So I said, you know what? Let me sit down. I even had Linda go edit it. I said, Linda, can you just do me a favor? I want to submit this article into this Aish website. Can you just edit it for me? So first of all, she had every sentence had issues, but I sent it in. They wrote back and they said, listen, this is not really the type of article we publish on this website. That was the end of my writing career.
But you should, right? Every week, Rabbi Broide, you're having interactions with the greater Jewish community in our area. You're so devoted and dedicated to outreach, inspire yourself to inspire others. You have stories that would really inspire. And the same way I pushed Rabbi Moskowitz, I'm going to push you. And the truth is, you, like many other great writers out there, don't even have to be the one to write. You can really even voice note an idea and have somebody help you turn that into an article. But it added a lot to our weekly in terms of kind of...
I would love that.
On the corner with Rabbi Broide, some interaction that week that you had with a fellow Jew. Sure. Avos Yisrael, love. So anyway, if we have any volunteers, if you are joining us on the many platforms we're streaming on right now, or you're listening to our podcast later, the #1 podcast in Judaism, then reach out to us. Rabbi Broide is looking for a ghost writer. When we had Ben Shapiro on the show.
We'll put your name on it. Don't worry about it.
Do you remember when Ben Shapiro was on Behind the Bima, apolitically, but when he was on Behind the Bima, do you remember that he mentioned at his height he was ghostwriting 10 articles a day. A day. Think about that.
Rabbi Broide, he can write your articles.
Yeah, well, he's the one to write from me.
But if he's too busy, by the way, then if anyone else would like to volunteer, Rabbi Broide would love your help to take some of his thoughts and experiences and turn it into an article. I'll close and bring on our guest, who we are all so excited and waiting for, by saying that I was once at a rabbinic conference and a rabbi was saying, I hate it that my whole life revolves around looking for drasha material or article material, and I can never just be. And I can't feel more the opposite. I think my life is like everyone else is living in black and white, and I'm living in color, because whether you're on a plane, whether you're at a cafe, whether you're in a conversation, whatever you're doing, you're like, how can I extract a lesson? Where's the depth in this? What can I share from this? And I don't think that distracts or detracts from it. I think it enhances it in so many ways. Again, with the cynicism of friends and family who will sometimes say, is this for a drasha? Am I going to be in a drasha right now? But it's really an empowering way of living.
But let's be honest, right? Because we like being honest, and we're behind the Bima now. I love it. Writing is a totally different genre. I've found, oh my gosh. I found it enormously. No, I'll tell you what that is.
That's a drasha. That's a drasha right there.
No, I'll tell you what that is. We just caught something in the house. I'm just saying.
Oh, that was a trap that just went off?
That was a trap. A trap just went off.
Whoa. Hold on. Breaking news. Should I play the breaking news again?
There is a caught animal in the Moskowitz house right now. My wife is going to freak out. So, anyway, so let's be honest. It is enormously stressful sometimes. Right. Yes. I mean, it's enormously stressful sometimes when you're sitting there on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday, whenever you sit down to write and you have that writer's block. Do you ever have that, Rabbi Goldberg? Do you ever hit that and you're just like, that
all the time,
anxiety?
All the time. Adam Grant, who I'm a big fan of, has a book called The Originals, I think. In it, he talks about, I believe it's in there, the notion of creativity on demand. Creativity used to be, you think about the past, like some brilliant creative author, artist, they'd go to some seashore community and spend the summer clearing their mind, and they'd be struck by creativity, and they'd introduce some genius. And now we live in a world that's like, you need a post, you need an article, you need to put out a speech, it's like on demand, creativity on demand. Everything else in life is on demand. Creativity should be on demand as well. And creativity doesn't work on demand. So I want to bring on Joey so we can pick this conversation up another time, but maybe next week, Rabbi Moskowitz, what are the things that you need to get creative? And I don't know if anyone listened recently, Tim Ferriss interviewed Seinfeld about this, and he talked about that. Amazing. How do you schedule time for creativity? What goes into writing? What's the environment? What's the desk have to look like? There's a lot that goes into the setting that puts you in a creative mood and a creative place. I'd be really curious to learn what does that for you.
I'm just curious also, is there a difference between writing your drasha every week and writing your article? because you do right. You do right.
Yeah, because a very
Right?
different experience. A very different
Absolutely.
experience. But I'll tease one thing for me, and I'm curious yours: cleanliness. I cannot have clutter when I sit down to write. I need my desk clean. I need wherever I am to be clean and neat and organized, and then I have the mental space and capacity to write.
Well, we're happy to report that as of a minute ago, your house is a little bit more clean. So you are in a great position to be able to.
I think my wife ran out the door.
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. We are so excited this evening to welcome the one and the only, the great Rabbi Joey Rosenfeld. Rabbi Rosenfeld, Rabbi Joey, thank you so much for being with us and for your willingness to go behind the Bima.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you.
So, Rabbi Joey, I really want to jump right in to tell our audience, and you're not a stranger to many. There's a whole world who follows you. There's a lot of excitement on social media today that you would be joining us as our guest. They know the work you're doing in St. Louis in the addiction community as a psychotherapist, as a therapist, bringing a really unusual, borderline unique perspective of mysticism, Kabbalah, of Jewish thought, even to a non-Jewish clientele. The Sfarim you've written, the articles, a recent Mishpacha feature that talked all about. But share with us your background. How did you get to that? Right? You weren't born with a long beard and a Kabbalist. You weren't necessarily on the trajectory. When your high school career guidance person met with you, they probably didn't say, Joey, I see mysticism in your future. You are on track to be a great Kabbalist. So tell our audience, tell us about your background, about how you got here, and about what positioned you to be where you are, that you're changing the world with your new vocabulary and new perspective.
Well, without agreeing to 95% of the praises you just threw at me, I will certainly try and answer the question. So first and foremost, I've been blessed with 4 factors that kind of influenced my life to where I was moving towards, and then an added factor that allows me to continue from where I'm at now. Those factors are family, my parents and my siblings, my brothers, my friends, my rebbeim in my high school in particular, and the community that I lived in. So I grew up in Woodmere, and I went to Halb throughout my life, and I went to DRS High School, where each and every year my rebbeim, Rabbi Emerson, Rabbi Yudin, Rabbi Grala, Rabbi Storch, Rabbi Cohn, Rabbi Kamenetsky, the Menahel, all of them were remarkable influences on me, in particular because I needed that influence. I was certainly not a good student by any imagination. But because I struggled scholastically or behaviorally, so I was able to kind of get extra time with the rabbis, and I was able to get insight with regards to how to move towards the right direction. But
you say, can I interrupt you for 1 second? Did you say you struggled scholastically, academically, or also behaviorally?
I said both. I said both, so it was certainly both, but nothing too overwhelming. Just aware of the struggle of kind of the normative high school scholastic experience was not what I was doing, right. And at the same time, I was influenced. My father brought me up on incredible music. The first concert that I ever went to was an Allman Brothers concert with my dad at the Beacon. So from the very beginning, I was interested in kind of different expressions of creativity, of music, of insight. But I was always interested. I was always interested in depth. At that stage, whether it was reading Where the Wild Things Are numerous times, or trying to grapple with the injustice of Alexander and the No Good, Very Bad, Horrible Day, or the hopeful attitudes of Oh, the Places You'll Go. And my older brother, I was able to be exposed to different teachings and different thinkers at the time, and different trends in music and movies. So from the beginning, I was always interested in something more than what I was offered. And so while it was certainly not expressed towards mysticism by any means, it was a movement for more, or ode, or something more than what was present, which I believe is the very same impulse that drives a person into kind of Panemius HaTorah. So while content-wise it was very different, but the form of my experience was somewhat of the same pulsation. It was a desire for more. But with good friends and with good teachers and living within the vicinity of Rav Weinberger, Shlita, I was really able to kind of figure out how those drives could propel me to Eretz Yisrael, which is really where I figured out the language that spoke to me.
There is so much I want to unpack right now, and this is so exciting. I don't even know exactly which direction to go in because there's so much, but let's start with this.
Sure.
First of all, I think there's an enormous lesson that comes out of what you just said, which is not every child that's struggling academically or behaviorally is because they're a troublemaker. What you described, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe help us unpack it further, is that it's not because you were living so shallow and superficial, it's because you were craving something so much deeper that it presented itself as academic or behavioral challenges, when really all along it was a craving and ambition for more. And what a message to educators, to parents, to all of us in terms of our tolerance and how much we should try to understand what's driving what looks like rebelliousness or misbehavior in people, and to understand where it's actually coming from. So let's start with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Rav Kook, Zchus Yogan Aleinu, has a famous mimer called Nishamusha Olam HaTohu, the souls of the worlds of chaos. And in fact, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, in trying to find the sources that inspired his father's inspiration, so to speak, without sources, Rav Tzvi Yehuda and his Talmidim were trying to root it in text. Rav Kook speaks of certain neshamos that emerge into the world, and I'm not speaking of myself, but a general kind of zeitgeist of, I believe, our generation, of neshamos who are dissatisfied with what is presented to them, both religiously, ethically, morally, even philosophically speaking. And that dissatisfaction results in misbehavior of chutzpah, of brazenness, and unwillingness to kind of get in line. And what Rav Kook does in the way that only Rav Kook was capable of doing is he reveals that brazenness, that chutzpah, of our generation is not because we're not interested. It's because we want more. We have tasted something, so to speak, that this world does not offer, and which forces a person to seek out insight and intensity in other places. And at first glance, that looks like a person is just not following suit, but in truth, it's an impulse that is born within the spirit that desires something that the external nature of all things, in whatever category a person is exposed to break the ground open, to seek out something underneath.
So I don't want to go in this direction completely now because there's so much more to talk to you about, but it's worth unpacking more or investigating more. What should teachers particularly be looking for in the student who presents that way, who's acting out or rebellious or unsuccessful, but it's really not driven by some deficiency. It's really driven by this quest for more. Mm-hmm. How could they identify it, and what should they do with it? Teachers who have 20, 23 students in a class who just need to get material taught probably don't have what it takes in order to be able to interact with that student who is exhibiting that what you describe as that quest for ode the more. So that's worth coming back to. But I want to skip to something different. Take us behind the Bima with Joey Rosenfeld, who goes from a student struggling academically to a published, prolific author and speaker. What went on and what clicked in you? What is still clicking in you? And I relate to this a little bit. My mother loves to say that I was not a great student and I didn't succeed academically, and they had to chase me to write a paper or study for a test, and I now act on a deadline to write every week and to speak every week. And my mother chooses to be humored by that, which is a healthy way of looking at it. But what clicked in you? How did you go from the struggling student to the really a scholar, an academic, a published and prolific author?
Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, it was love and encouragement, unconditional love, which I received from my home, from my parents, from my grandparents, from my siblings, from my spouse, from my teachers. So that was number one. Instead of punitive approaches and the draconian path, which seeks to force the person who is not in line to kind of align themselves, rather I was given space to kind of do my thing. And there were various individuals at certain points, a story I always like to recall, it could bring me to tears because I didn't know that he was my Rebbe yet. But when my father was kind of overwhelmed with the dysfunction, he had spoken to Rav Weinberger Shlita, and Rav Weinberger gave a drasha, and the drasha was based on a Sfas Emes, I believe. I was dragged to shul with my father, and I went to Eish Kodesh, and Rav Weinberger gave a drasha about how when Yaakov Avinu arrived at the well, that there was a boulder covering the well. And what the Sfas Emes describes is that each of us are a well, and each of us have flowing waters and what to offer and something unique, that specific point that we come to this world to bring out. And very often it looks like the boulder is covering it up and a person assumes there's nothing underneath. But the Sfas Emes says, in the words of Rav Weinberger, is that the Iker Chizuk is to simply move the boulder away and allow a person to be tivi, allow a person to be natural, allow a person to express themselves the way that their neshama is speaking to them. So there was that. And the most important thing I did in Eretz Yisrael, I went to OJ for 2 years. I had wonderful rebbeim there. I was exposed to tremendous thinkers, Rav Gordon, Rabbi Kenigsberg, just very special people. But I learned how to read Hebrew. I learned how to not be afraid of the Hebrew language, because I knew that Bava Metzia Be'in was not necessarily going to be the thing that kind of led me to invest myself into a lifelong quest of finding God and living my life according to those principles. And the benefit of being in OJ is that it's in Hari Yehuda. So it's one of the untouched elements of Eretz Yisrael, where you have fields there. And Rav Asher Freund, Schussi Yagan Aleinu, found Beit Meir to be a very unique place. He said that's where David HaMelech found the inspiration to write Tehillim. There was Breslov already there. There were the Kabbalah caves. So I found myself outside more, plus the skill of learning Hebrew. And I was chutzpahdik. I started reading the books that I wanted to read. I saw Maharals on the shelf, and I said, well, what's this? And once I stopped being so afraid of the language, the books opened themselves up to me. And they were the ideas that kind of spoke to me directly. So it wasn't much of an effort. Once I started learning the Maharal, which was the original kind of insight that I had, it was kind of no looking back for me.
I want to let my co-host jump in. So let me ask you just one more question now. You described being an OJ in the open fields. Have you ever planted a garden? Do you ever have the experience of putting something in the ground and watching it sprout and grow? And I'm half joking, but I'm also very serious, because I think much of the work that you do in the recovery community, which is what we should talk about also, is making people realize when they've hit rock bottom, maybe they're just a seed that's entered the ground and they're going to blossom. Their best is yet to come. So they tried to bury us. They didn't realize we were a seed. So have you? What's the mystical idea of eating that pepper? What did I experience tonight?
The fruition of labor, the purpose of creation, which is B'zeh asapecha toch alechem. We look at the transgression of Adam HaRishon as a descent away from the ideal. But in truth, it's the descent that enables the essence of what it means to be a human being. Bechira, choosing to experience loss, choosing to experience it in a non-understandable act of quite literally destruction, planting a seed. As the tzaddikim of Ishbitz and Radzim point out, Zriya is Emunah. Zra'im is the Seder of Emunah, because what a person is doing is counterintuitive completely. I am giving away, I am burying, I am allowing a seed to die, and I am closing my mind off to any hope that that seed will become anything else. But it is specifically out of that encounter with hopelessness or the loss of self-sufficiency or powerlessness that throws a person into the space of emunah, which is that super-rational aspect that we all have in the depths of our singularity. So planting, I believe, is ultimately one of the greatest examples of what Pnimius HaTorah is about, how destruction and absence actually are the birthplace, the very birthplace of growth. And this is clear from the sugyos of the Eitz Hadas and the Eitz HaChaim. It's clear when the Idra Rabbah, when the Zohar refers to the Chavraya, the friendship that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had as Mechatzah de Chakla. They were gardeners. They were those who meant to thresh the field, to clear the field out from the overgrowths and the confusion, and to see beyond the acts of destruction and see the potential of growth within it. So I think
it was a mystical experience. You're validating me. It was a mystical experience I had, that pepper.
I can't speak for mystical experience, but it's certainly the ideas that our Mekubalah speak about.
Fantastic. Rabbi Moskowitz.
Yeah, so I want to just, first of all, thank you so much. And I want to build upon what Rabbi Goldberg alluded to, which is your work in the recovery community. And while it's one thing to hear about your discussions of Rav Tzadok and Ishbitz and Pnimius HaTorah in the context of Judaism and talking to a couple rabbis on a Wednesday night, it's very different to relate those ideas to either non-religious or non-Jewish people who are going through some of the most traumatic, painful moments of their life. What gave you the confidence to do that, to translate the language of the Maharal and Ishbitz and Rav Nachman, who always talk, so many of these ideas you've been alluding to really emerge from him. What gave you the confidence to take that language, take that vocabulary, and share it with people and translate into a vocabulary that other people are going to be able to understand? What gave you the confidence to do that? What gave you the impulse to do that? And what are some of the challenges that you encounter when doing that?
So to answer the first question with a mashal, the Leshem Shabbat V'Chalomer of Shlomo Elyashiv, the Rebbe of Rav Kook, the grandfather of Rav Elyashiv, Zchus Yagon Aleinu, who passed away recently in the recent few years, he doesn't enter into a discussion about the authorship of the Zohar HaKadosh. He says very simply, he says, V'ha'emes eid la'atzmo, that truth testifies upon itself. So it's certainly not my own confidence. I'm not a particularly confident person, as those who know me understand. I live with a particularly strong level of self-doubt. But the content, the words of our tzaddikim speak for themselves. And I believe in the words of our tzaddikim, and I believe in the power of the words of the tzaddikim, and that's where the confidence comes from. The ideas speak for themselves. Secondly, the translatability, and I love that you brought up the word translation, because translation is an idea that I am obsessed with. That translation is not simply the transition from one register of language onto another, but it is the impossible possibility of taking something from its original form, changing it, yet allowing it to maintain its kernel of essence. So it's a miraculous power of taking something that was one thing and allowing it to become something else, yet believing that the secret of unity persists. And so when I found myself in this job in St. Louis, thankfully my wife is from St. Louis, and we moved here unbeknownst to me under the chuppah that was kind of written in. And it's I can honestly say it's probably one of the greatest things that has happened in my life. When I went to my Rebbe of Weinberger, I asked him, and he said, "Run as fast as you can." And he actually said, he said, "You'll learn to give over Torah, in a place of quiet." But I think that the translatability. So I found myself working with non-Jews, people who have never seen a Jew before. One of the most important things I heard in my practicum when I was working in the Bronx for the criminal justice system for severely addicted individuals who had committed significant crimes. I remember asking my supervisor at the time, who was not Jewish, whether I should wear my yarmulke and my tzitzis out. And she said, when the clients see you, they will see two things. They will see suffering, and they will see resiliency, and they will see faith. So 3 things. And from that point forward, I was unabashedly open about my faith and about my experience. And I have found that people are thirsty for content. People are not exposed to ideas that speak to the human condition. Forget about faith, forget about fundamentals of faith or theology. Nobody has been given voice for the struggle to become part and parcel of the spiritual experience. And Hasidus and Kabbalah and the Vilna Gaon, these things are axiomatic. Forget all. My father sent me to Eretz Yisrael with Camus, Kierkegaard, and Kafka, and Siddhartha. And so the end result of these books are the starting point of Hasidus, meaning the Baal Shem Tov was not pretending that everything was perfect. The Baal Shem Tov was trying to find light in a world that was profoundly imperfect. And so I have found that the language of imperfection and validating it just speaks to a very inner point. And plus, my clients don't know the difference between Naaman of Bratslav, the 17th century mystic who spoke of psychological syndromes, or Abraham Maslow, or any of the theorists, Freud, Lacan, all of the different philosophical or psychological language. By making the names anonymous, the content speaks for itself.
I want to ask you a question within the recovery. It's very much on my mind. You alluded to it before in terms of confidence or self-esteem. Is very much on my mind. We were talking before you came on about writing articles, put yourself out there. So, we're writing articles, we speak, we put ourselves out there, and the larger the platform, the more of a target you paint, and the more of invitation of feedback you get, whether you want it or not, solicited or unsolicited, desired or not desired. I woke up yesterday to a text from one of my daughters in Israel that said, Abba, did you see what so-and-so posted on her Instagram page about you? Which I didn't, and I could care less, and I'm not checking. And my daughter didn't know firsthand either. Someone had something said to her. So why am I bringing it up with you? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, in recovery, I don't know if it's one of the steps, but certainly the language is a phrase that I've always appreciated, but I'm trying to now decide is a part of the Jewish lexicon, which is, what other people think about me is none of my business. And there's such value to that, and I think there's such truth to that. Don't be consumed and don't mold yourself and don't try to conform to what other people want on the one hand. Build up your self-confidence, your self-esteem. What other people think about you is none of your business. And on the other hand, Judaism says we have an institution called Maras Ayin. You can't give the wrong impression. Visim Nikiyim Hashem Yisrael. You have to try to be above board because the impression we leave on others, it matters and it's important. So combining your recovery expertise and your Torah knowledge, what would you say? How does Judaism feel about that? How would you counsel me right now, live in front of everybody? Is what other people think about me none of my business? Or is it my business and I should care about it?
This is the second week in a row that we've had a therapy session for Rabbi Goldberg. I'm just putting it out there.
The last week's bill we got was huge, so
I'm okay. I'm okay with that.
The prayer, so to speak, that is utilized very often in the rooms of 12-step is grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Rav Kook's Chusei Yogan Aleinu actually in Midos Ra'aya has a very different taich. It's possible that there was historical overlap, just rooted in the Christian theologian who actually penned that prayer. Possible. I am not claiming that that's true, but Rav Kook basically phrases it differently. Hashem, grant me the ability to fix what I can fix, to accept the things that I cannot fix, and to rest with the courage to know the difference. So first and foremost, I would say if a person is walking around like a lunatic, and I'm not talking to you, Rabbi Goldberg, if a person is walking around and making a mess out of themselves, so at that point, the avodah is not to be makabel and say, okay, I am for myself, I don't have to care about what anybody else is doing. These are the basic fundamentals of cognitive behavioral therapy as well. CBT does not say all of our thought patterns are true. They say that we have to check the evidence of those thought patterns, meaning checking evidence implies the possibility that perhaps everyone in this room is looking at me in a funny way. But once we have clarified the distinction and it's something that we feel is essential to us and that we can't turn our attention from it, at that point, I believe the words of Rabbi Nachman are instructive in two places. Number one, in between the two volumes of the teachings of Likutei Moharan, there's a remarkable teaching of Echad Haya Avraham. Avraham was singular. Avraham was one, which meant that Avraham quite literally ignored every other aspect of existence other than his own inner dialogue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I remember reading in a Mishpacha magazine many years ago that Rav Wolbe Chusei Aleinu's son, who also works in addiction, used to come to Be'er Yaakov in his army fatigues, I believe, or dressed differently. And the yeshiva brachim would look at him and they would kind of say, you're embarrassing your father. And he once went over and he says, Abba, am I embarrassing you? Ichbat lecha? And the response of Rav Wolbe was, Ichbat li ma shekasav b'Shulchan Aruch. Anything else I don't care about. I care about the letter of the law, whatever is the trapping or the form or the shape. Basically, you do you. A person needs to be able to find comfort within themselves. Now, thankfully, this insecurity that we all have goes back to all of the tzaddikim. As the Yerushalmi says that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was struggling. Rabbi Akiva was struggling. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, is it not enough that me and your creator recognize your greatness? Is it not enough that we recognize you? You don't need any other affirmation to feel valuable and validated about what you're doing. Rabbi Nachman says in the fifth teaching of Likutei Moharan that a person needs to see it as if they're the only person in creation. And once we recognize that we're the only person in creation, the next step, very randomly, is let me find the deficiencies in the world and let me learn how to fix them. So there are some basic steps there that Rabbi Nachman is taking for granted. Our job is to recognize that it's just us and Hashem. And once we recognize that, things are broken and let's fix them. As long as a person feels that what they're doing is bringing more light, the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kavod to Hashem, kavod to His Torah, then I think that the naysayers or the responses the stupidity of people knows no bounds. People will say things that are ridiculous, and I find it safer to assume that it's the revelation of their own heart rather than the expression of the truth.
Just to push back a little bit on that, just to build on it, that's easy to write about in a sefer. It's easy to talk about in a podcast, but Rabbi Goldberg, looking at you, you don't have that luxury. You don't have the luxury to say that what I'm doing is correct and everyone else is going to have to get in line or, figure it out for themselves. As a communal leader, your job is to either bring the people along, and you do have to be concerned about public opinion, public policy, how things play out in the street. You can't just do everything that you want. You do have to be concerned about public perception a little bit.
I remember a story I heard from Rav Chaim Waxman when I was in high school, that Rav Shmuel Shmelka of Nikolsburg, when he became a Kehila Rav, and I'm not a Kehila Rav, so I can't speak, but I'll say this story, that before he brought the board into his office, he had them mount his walking stick on the wall. And when the board came in, they said, Rebbe, why do you have this? He said, just to let you know that I can walk out of here at any second.
That is a good policy. That's a good policy.
It's your walking
yeah.
stick.
Yeah. So, Rabbi Broide, please.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, for decades, drug addiction was obviously something that was swept under the carpet in the Jewish community. And then I would say in the last number of years, we've been putting a lot of emphasis on it. There are a lot of people that are getting more involved. Rabbis like Rabbi Moskowitz, Rabbi Goldberg are talking about it regularly. And we're doing what we think is a better job. I'm just wondering, what do you see out there? Is the Jewish community doing better? Is it something which we've still got a long way to go? Is it getting worse? And we don't even know it.
It's an incredibly important question. I'm also stuck with being able to answer it because I live in a small Jewish community right now. So just the sample size itself prevents me from kind of really grasping what is going on. Plus, with COVID, I just don't see people anymore. So, but I think we're certainly doing a much better job in terms of recognition and acknowledging that a shikar is not a goy, and that addiction and alcoholism are very much entrenched within Jewish culture, both from an active, sometimes exposure level of shul kiddushes and things like that, or a romanticization of substance usage, as well as just the awareness of trauma and mental health, which certainly does not spare the Jewish people. It might be found more prevalently within the Jewish people. We've been through some trauma. So I think we're doing a really good job at beginning to be aware of the problem. I think there are people like Zvi Gluck, Menachem Poznansky, different therapists. I mean, the model, the OG, so to speak, is Rav Torsky, who was just a Kiddush Hashem on every imaginable level. And so there's voices and there's insight. I mean, that's not an exhaustive list of the names, obviously, but we're no longer afraid of looking the problem in the face. But unfortunately, what seems to be continuously strong is the stigmatization of addiction, the stigmatization of acting out. And that prevents people from paying attention until things get really bad. So obviously we react when people die, God forbid. Right. But we're not working from the ground level to understand where these issues emerge from. Because my bias is that addiction does not start with drug abuse. Addiction starts very often with birth. Addiction is a response to pain. Addiction is a response to wanting more. And sometimes those substances are the only thing that a person thinks will offer them more. But we have a reservoir of insight into recovery above and beyond the 12 steps, if I can be so bold as to say such a thing. I know that there are people who have wanted to add the 13th step of Ahava and Echad. I don't think that's necessary. I think that the 12 steps are a gift. They provide a deep structure. If we properly understand the origins of the thought, including William James and Carl Jung, with all of their problematic orientations, I think we can somewhat get over the fear that it's another religion. AA was started as a response to religious programs. It was a breakaway from the Oxford group. So I think we have to be better at utilizing these skills. I think the Jewish community has become remarkable with regards to essay and sexual addictions, but nowhere near as strong with regards to education, prevention, and treatment in terms of drug addiction and alcoholism.
We're actually very proud. We're going to be hosting a program soon and announcing Moshe Yachnis, who's a member of our community and also is really an expert in this area. We are collaborating, Boca Raton Synagogue, with his program Onward Living, a nonprofit facility for people who are in recovery. And we are partnering members of the community and re-entry back into the religious community, particularly for these members in recovery who have left or who used to be part of a religious community. So we're trying to create this collaboration between the two, and we're excited about not only the success hopefully it'll have locally, but being able to replicate it more broadly. But let me ask you, Reb Joey, so time doesn't allow us, and it'll be an injustice to even ask you to do this, but if you could succinctly at least give Rashi Prakim, just give some beginnings of an idea. So you're encountering a person, and it could be any one of us, in any period of our life where there's an emptiness inside us, there's a vacuum. There are people in life who realize that they have a lot of things, and they have a lot of money, and they thought they had all the things that were supposed to bring happiness, and they're not happy. So it could be precipitated by any kind of thing, but there's an emptiness, there's a hole inside a person's heart, and they're trying to fill it with these fleeting pleasures and experiences of all the addictions, from gambling to sex to alcohol to drugs. So you're going to fill it with something else. Where do you get started? How do you show them the hole in the heart is coming? They can't fill it with something counterfeit, and what do you replace it with instead? Give us some sense.
I think first and foremost, we have to validate the hole in the heart. Before we even begin discussion about how to fill it, we have to normalize the experience of feeling like we're always already lacking something. Because contrary to many other faith systems, Judaism does not perceive the idea of perfection as a concept whatsoever. Even prior to the Ched of Adam HaRishon, things were imperfect. That was the injunction to protect oneself, to be guarding. The implication is that we're susceptible to failure already. Not to mention the tzimtzum, the act of contrition and shattering of the vessels. The birthplace of human experience is brokenness. Once we allow that experience to be validated as a normative space in which to encounter Hashem, at that point, a person begins to stop trying to fill the hole and actually allowing the void to be felt, to be mitmoded with it, to face it unflinchingly. Many of our tzaddikim, Rabbi Nachman says that Kol ha'olam kulo hu gesher tsar ma'od v'ha'ikar lo lefachid klal. The world is a very, very narrow bridge, and the main thing is to not be afraid. A person does not need to be warned not to be afraid if there's no reason to be afraid. Rabbi Nachman was aware. He said, this is terrifying, guys. What you're going to do as human beings, being in this world where God is concealed, or apparently concealed, is scary. And so that has to become the starting point of our encounter with Hashem. And so to not feel bad about not feeling, but rather to recognize that, okay, Hashem, I'll play this game. I'm here in the hastara shebetoch hastara, the doubled concealment, the choshech kaful u'mechupel, the doubled over darkness. So we validate that space. Then we begin to address the question of substance. The question, instead, the typical language that has been used towards maladaptive behavior is, what is wrong with you that you don't recognize how destructive this is? How selfish are you that you continue doing this? It's the wrong question. The question needs to be, what is the substance providing you that you can't get naturally? And if the answer is, I don't feel anxious anymore when I'm under the influence of something, or I'm not scared anymore, or I don't feel alone anymore, so then we have direction. Then we know what we need to try and learn how to do in a sober way. Something that I've always said to my clients, and I believe it deeply, addicts and alcoholics or potential addicts, they don't drug themselves or numb themselves because they enjoy pleasure more than other people. They're in more pain than other people. And that pain is what propels a person to try and find relief. The model of AA, and I believe the model of the Torah itself, is that even the strongest substance in the world, let's say the illicit substances that people use, those things are more pleasurable, mistama, than anything available. But that's still not big enough. And the answer is that you have to go to something even bigger. And the only thing even bigger is God. The only thing even bigger is ruchnius. Is the idea of living with a presence of something in your life, of believing in something bigger than oneself, or community, or whatever it is. The Kotzker Rebbe said it most. The Kotzker Rebbe famously said that there's nothing more whole than a broken heart. That it's the breaking point that allows us to encounter the shards of ourselves, that allows us to rebuild ourselves, which is the avoda. And this is not taught nearly enough. This is not esoteric. This is the first parak in Mesilas Yesharim. Ramchal says, guys, you want to know what life is? It's a battle. You're already thrown into a raging war. Where did the war come from? Doesn't matter. It's just a battle. It's a struggle. The first thing that you have to do as a human being, learn how to care for things. Zahirut, be careful. Be aware that there are pitfalls and things that are difficult. But that's where Hashem wants us. That's the teachings of our tzaddikim. Hashem wants us down here.
Wow.
Malachim couldn't receive the Torah because they didn't have a Yetzer Hara. They didn't know death. They weren't afraid.
I'm going to follow up with you offline because I have a chavrusa in Tanya. I was learning today with Rabbi Tauger, who's a great scholar in Chabad, has translated many of their works as a member of our community, and we've been learning Tanya. We're the 12th parak, and the Beinonim versus the Tzaddik, and the notion that in Chassidus, at least in Chabad, this view that the Avos were tzaddikim, the Alter Rebbe met that level of tzaddik. The tzaddik doesn't even have an instinct or an intuition, doesn't even struggle, whereas the Beinoni, who makes all the right decisions, but struggles. And I said the whole institution of the tzaddik, or to read Tanakh as being filled with tzaddikim, makes them utterly and entirely unrelatable. So I'm struggling with that, but we'll talk more about Tanya on the other side. Let me ask you this as we're heading towards a close, and we're so grateful you're spending your evening with us. So Reb Joey, you're learning, you're growing, you learn the language, you're out in the mountains of Are Yehuda. Why are you not in chinuch? Why are you not in education? Why are you not in the rabbinate? How did you end up in recovery instead of what might have seemed a more logical trajectory based on the path that you were then on?
When I was in the smicha program in Landers, and I couldn't stop learning Leshem, so I couldn't master Bata V'chalav properly. That's number one. It just wasn't doing it for me. I needed Rav Kook and the Leshem more. I don't know. It's just it's the things that I'm doing, the way of teaching that I'm engaged in are things that if you had asked me a year ago, 2 years ago, I would have never conceived of. And Hashem has been incredibly kind to me and graceful to me in terms of giving me space to express myself. I struggle with responsibility. I can't, I can't carry other people's burdens so much. I like sharing insight. I like sharing the insight of our tzaddikim and letting the words of the tzaddikim speak through me. It's a great question. I don't necessarily have a wonderful answer for it. My family is all Rabbanim. My grandfathers, my maternal grandfather, my paternal grandfather, whose yahrzeit it is, who was a kadosh v'nora. They were all mechanchim. They were principals. My father had smicha. My brother is an assistant shul rabbi at Lincoln Square. My other brother was in chinuch. It's always been a mahalach, but and I don't see myself as not being in chinuch. It's just a different space. My favorite teachings are, for Rabbi Nachman, teaching the world is sometimes more important than teaching those on the inside, because shining the kavod of the Torah and the kavod of Hashem into places that would not have otherwise seen it transforms darkness to reveal an even deeper level of light.
Wow. That's amazing. Joey, thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for all that you're doing. If people want to learn more, you could find Reb Joey. A lot of his shiurim are online. In this half hour, 40 minutes we spent together, I know you gave me enormous amount to think about. You inspired really all of us. Just by touching on the beginning of these conversations, people can learn with you and listen to you in such a real way online. And the beauty of the internet today is that you could have a shtetl wherever you live. And St. Louis is a beautiful community. It's a wonderful community, especially if your wife is listening. It's a fantastic community. I wonder what's next for you. Do you bring your talents to a bigger community, or is it dafka there where you have the space and the margin to think? From there you can broadcast these beautiful, quiet thoughts out to the world. Who knows? We'll have to have you back to learn what's next for you. But what's next for all of us is to be able to continue to learn. So everyone's invited to learn with you. Where can they find you online?
So there's something called Shefa Podcasts, and there's a podcast set up with Inward with Rabbi Joey Rosenfeld, which my very dear friend Zach Kamenetz set up for me, which is probably 8 or 9 series of 10 shiurim each on different tzaddikim, on different topics. Right now I'm giving a series of shiurim on the inner world of anxiety. And trying to show how our tzaddikim spoke to that experience. My writings, especially the writings on the tzaddik Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita, are on academia, and if anybody wants any book. My first published kuntris is on the sugya and Kabbalah called Butzina de Cardenusa, the darkened flame, the first instantiation of limitation. So I've always been talking about the same thing. So, really? So you can just Google my name.
Really amazing. Thank you so much for being with us. Hatzlacha, tremendous success in all that you're doing, and thanks for bringing so much light into the world and our world. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
Amazing,
What a
amazing, amazing.
story. I had
Now you
no
know why
idea.
people love him. I don't want to embarrass him and put him on the spot by asking how old he is, or I should say how young
Yeah,
he is.
how old is he?
But he's significantly younger than I am, and I'm a young man, so
Right.
that makes him like an infant. He's like an adolescent. But in all seriousness, he's really a young man. Such wisdom and insight, and it's broadened by what he's doing. I think had he gone into kind of a typical chinuch, it would be perhaps less experience with people in pain, and not to say that the average young person doesn't have what to share, but working in that recovery community is interacting with a lot of souls, sometimes in their most raw format and real format, which probably only adds to him, which is amazing.
Well, let me take
Early
something he
30s.
said and
My friend
put it
Reb
back on
Pesach
you.
who's watching, Reb Pesach Summer who's watching, who's a big fan of Reb Joey, says early 30s, it kills him.
Early 30s.
Does it kill you, by the way? What was your thought while you're listening to him? I felt grossly inadequate and pathetic.
No, of course. Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, the vocabulary. But let me take something that he said and flip it on you now. Because he asked him why he wasn't a pulpit rabbi, and he said because he can't bear to carry other people's pain. Do you feel that as a pulpit rabbi, you sit, and again, I know you probably, other than your wife, probably better than anyone else here. And I know that the majority of your day is feeling other people's pain. It's dealing with other people's pain and suffering and listening to their stories and the tears. And does that ever overwhelm you? Does that weigh on you? Do you ever take that home with you? Do you ever say to yourself, I just can't bear it anymore? How do you relate to that? Take our viewers behind the beam of what it's like as a rabbi to sit there and listen to stories all day long of sickness, of illness, of tragedy, and to be able to also be a human being while listening to all those stories.
I think we're out of time, so I'm not sure we can talk about it. It's an important topic. I'd love to talk about it. It's actually been a pretty crazy few weeks, so I don't want to be my first time crying on behind the bima and not being able to say anything. There's a lot of people and a lot of pain, and it's if you have a heart, you can't not feel that pain. You know, it's interesting. Shortly before we came on the air, I was meeting with someone going through a lot, someone that I love very much, and we were talking, and I said to them, Hashem has been beyond kind to me in ways I could never properly express gratitude, but one of them is a capacity to compartmentalize. I don't know whether I learned it by necessity or it was just a gift that he's given me, and sometimes my wife asks it too, but you can go, and you both do this, we do this regularly, that you go from the funeral to the wedding, to the shiva house, to the bar mitzvah, from the deathbed to the bris, and you have to compartmentalize. That doesn't mean that when you're with each experience, you're not genuine and real, b'asher hu sham, in that moment, in that experience. But if you don't compartmentalize, you'll be overwhelmed. And the ultimate compartmentalization, whatever that word is when you come home, right? Because you have a wife and kids, and you have you. You owe it to your own neshama. If you are entirely consumed by the composite of every conversation and every experience, then you'll just crumble. You'll implode. You can't possibly. So it's really critically important for survival, but more than that, for thriving, not just surviving, in your own life and with your own family, the ability, not in a callous way, but to compartmentalize and to say, that's real, right? We have a friend who's very sick and going through a hard time, and we love him. He's a special neshama, and you have a text exchange, and it breaks your heart. And then there are 400 other texts coming in, right? One about the milchik fork in the fleshik dishwasher. Right. Another, why rabbis hate their members that we haven't gotten vaccine for anyone. This is a real email. If you'd only stop behind the bima and try harder to get us all vaccines, you'd save lives. Right. We know you're sitting on the vaccines. You don't care enough to give them. So you have a person who's really, really struggling in the most real struggle that could exist, the most painful struggle that could exist. And then simultaneously you're getting inundated with texts or emails or phone calls. So you've got to compartmentalize. You got to finish that text and then go respond to the other texts and then check in on your kids' homework and then celebrate the red pepper and then celebrate. And if you can't compartmentalize, not out of callousness, but out of necessity, You also all do it. We all do it to a certain extent. Then you can't. What I find, and then I want to hear from you. What I find is that, the bad rabbis, I shouldn't say they're bad rabbis, they're great people and they're great rabbis. But when you can't do that, so then the coping mechanism is just to never feel, Because if I can't compartmentalize and put that aside, then I have to just not even really feel when I'm with you. It's a job, like doctors. I mean, it's not just rabbis who face this. Therapists, people who work in recovery, doctors, just anybody with a feeling heart feels this. But doctors, you go from oncologists, right? We've spoken to, and Rabbi Moskowitz, you know this well, and you've spoken to doctors. Oncologists go from patient to patient to patient to patient. So they have 40 patients in half a day, and each one of them is a world in crisis. So what are you going to absorb all that? You couldn't be a doctor for more than a week. You'd be finished. So you have so on the one hand, you could be no bedside manner, callous, you care less about anybody. So then you're a terrible doctor. So how can you care, but also be able to just set that aside, put it on a shelf, because you need to now next care about the next thing? I don't know. How do you do it?
Oh, that was beautiful. I mean, the part that resonated with me the most, and obviously I agree with you, and for those who are listening and watching, you just saw firsthand what makes Rabbi Goldberg so spectacular. But in all seriousness, for me, the biggest challenge is coming home. And you hit the nail on the head. Like, you could have a really challenging day. You could just have spoken to someone who had a diagnosis or just come from a deathbed and saying vitoy with someone. But when you walk in the door, your kids don't care about that. And they deserve a happy dad. They deserve an upbeat dad. They deserve 100% of you the second you walk in the door. And I really struggled with that at the beginning of my rabbinate, really struggled with it. And then the best advice I ever got was that before I come in the door now, I pause. And I just reflect upon where I'm about to go. That, there's the day, there's the chaos, there's the experience I have during the day. But when I walk through that threshold and when I come into that house and my kids come running up to me and ask me how my day is, I better be ready for them. And I better have a smile on my face and be upbeat and ready to get on the floor and play with them or do their homework with them or just schmooze about the day. And that transition is the hardest transition, but it's the transition that keeps us normal. And I think it's what our kids not only expect of us, but they deserve from us as well.
How do you do it? How do you stay mindful to do that? How do you not rush in while you're on the phone and you're busy and you have no time and you're like, let me sit on the couch. How do you stay mindful to create that ritual to do that before you walk in?
So I'm sure if my wife were here, she would give a rebuttal and say that there are days that I'm not successful in that, and none of us are perfect, and there are days that you just can't do that. But I really make cognizant effort before I come into the house to pause for a second, 5 seconds, 20 seconds, and just to gather myself and to say whatever it is on my mind, whether it's something that I have to write or something I have to take care of or someone that I just met with or something that's bothering me or a text message that just came in that's agitating me, and to take a deep breath and to really reflect upon the sanctity of what I'm about to come into, which is my home. And that's the most kadosh place outside of a shul, this most sanctified place I have on this earth is my home. And again, there are days when I'm entirely unsuccessful. And, we're real here on the show. There are days when I fail miserably, and my kids will look at me sometimes and they'll say, Daddy is in a mood. Something must have happened at work today. And you know what? You try to do better the next day. And I think that's like anything in life.
But it's also interesting. You have to think about our wives also. They many times have the same experiences. They're on the phone. They're talking to congregants. They're talking to people in the community. Right. It's like you go home, you walk in, and they're on the phone, because they're busy. But what I think is so fascinating is that, again, maybe someone will, I'm not going to say we're the only ones like this, because there'll be people that are going to write and they're going to say it's not true. But, I don't know what other types of jobs there are. You don't know that next phone call, what's coming in. So you pick up the phone and, okay, it's someone in the hospital. Okay, it's the wedding. It's the baby. It's this amazing story. I'll just give you an example. I got a phone call from a relative of John Kroll on Monday, right? So he says he's living in Israel. He's got a relative that just moved to Boca, just retired from Chicago. And he says he has yard site on Thursday. No connection to the community, no connection to any Jewish community. Can we get him connected to the shul? He'll say Kaddish, maybe get him an Aliyah. So I end up calling him. I call him right away. Wonderful doctor. Like, he's just like the greatest guy. And he really wants to find out more about our shul. So I figure, let me call the guy in Israel that sent me the information. And maybe there's, the more you talk to someone, you need to find that connection. If we're going to feel like right. there's some connection to the shul, What's that piece? You're not going to believe this. So I call the guy in Israel, and I'm just asking him about his relative that moved here, and he says, "Yeah, he's interesting." I said, he sounds like Sephardic, but I can't tell if he's Ashkenazi. Which minion can we kind of connect him with?" He says, "It's an amazing story, Phil. You're gonna hear this. You're not gonna believe it." He says his family moved to America. They came from Egypt after the '67 war. So I said, "You're not going to believe this. I never met anyone from Egypt my whole life. I just heard a story this past weekend
Shabbos.
at a bar mitzvah. I said, we're going to connect these two guys. I said, if you would have told me the story a week ago, I never would have thought anything of it.
Right.
Right. He's a doctor. This guy's a doctor. Sometimes that next phone, you don't know. And it's amazing. Sometimes the phone calls Hashem gives you are like, just, wow. How do you
you made a great point, Rabbi Broide, that really deserves to be repeated and focused on, and we're out of time, which is the story of my life. Maybe my first book, that'll be the name.
You're out of time.
That's gonna be the first book. I'm out of time. But you made such an important point. To a degree, we have the luxury that when we're making these phone calls, we have an office, we have shul, we have work. Our wives, who are rebbitins of the community, are often counseling, helping, checking in, listening. I know my wife's been on the phone all day trying to help older people with getting vaccine appointments, and some of them got vaccinated. And they have to do it within the home. They don't have the luxury of stopping outside the door and saying, I'm going to leave it outside. They've got to balance that. And that's a whole segment with rebbitins, how they balance it. That's complicated and difficult in their own way, how they do that. That's hard on all of them.
I always say, dinner time, phones off, afterward, phones off. And my wife said, it's very easy for you to say, right? You're on your phone all day. So yeah, you come home, you block off a half hour without a phone. She said, for me, as you said, there's no bifurcation there. There's no it stops here and it starts there. It all kind of blends together with the kids and the phone calls and the community and the appointments and the myriad of things that they're taking care of on a constant basis. I will add one point, which is that Rabbi Summer said on Facebook that every smicha student should watch this. What's unique here, and again, I'm not touting your own horns. I'm really trying to give chizuk to other people. What I find amazing about my personal job, and I know Rabbi Broide, you'll validate this as well, is that we have each other. I speak to many of my colleagues who go through the experiences that we just articulated, the sadness, the pain, the bearing the suffering of other people, and they do it alone, right? They don't have someone who, they have their spouse, but they don't always want to bring that home to the spouse. We are enormously fortunate that we have each other. And obviously we always maintain confidentiality, and when it's not appropriate, we won't tell each other the names or the circumstances, but the ability to call someone in the same community who can empathize with you, who can understand what you're going through, who can give you some advice when you need it, is absolutely priceless and something that I'm grateful for on a daily basis.
Another one of the great, great blessings in our life. Absolutely. So thank everyone who's still with us for what was, I really think, a really inspiring for me, Reb Joey and our conversations. I want to again thank Nini and Donnie Ross for sponsoring, and again wish a heartfelt refuah shlema to Yal Liora Basara, to Yerachmiel Daniel Ben Tova Basha. They should have a complete, speedy, and painless recovery. We should hear only good news from them and about them. I'll just end. It was a very serious episode, so I'll end on a light note. Lest anyone think all this goes to our head, lest anyone think that the rabbinic ego gets inflated by the wonderful feedback that we get, somebody decided to comment on a bunch of old podcasts, old episodes of Behind the Bima, and wrote on almost every episode, these guys are Larry, Mo, and Curly, and that was their great feedback on Behind the Bima. So they didn't say who's who. Yeah,
one of us
kind of disappointed, but basically they decided to write. Yeah, they were not writing it out of love. Let's just put it that way. That these guys are the Three Stooges, Larry, Mo, and Curly. We're still figuring out who's who. But on that note, we'll thank everybody. Thank you, our sponsors. Thank you, Rabbi Rosenfeld, for joining. Until next time, everybody stay happy, stay healthy, and stay holy.